Greetings, Earthlings and astronauts of all ages. Welcome back to Spacecraft. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Science Officer Mily here reporting. Today's show is all about constellations, different pictures and stories that we see in the stars. Astronomers use these constellations, or pictures, or groupings of stars in the night sky to orient themselves and navigate when they're looking for things out in space. Nowadays, we use 88 different constellations with specific boundaries around them to navigate the night sky. And these 88 constellations are based off of Greek and Roman mythology. So they're usually related to characters and different stories, as well as animals or objects. We're going to learn how to spot some constellations ourselves from our own backyard and learn about the different types of constellations that we can see in the night sky. Now, not all constellations are always visible to us depending on where we are on the globe, and also if we're out in the countryside or wilderness, or if we're in a big city. Now, I personally live in a pretty big city, and cities give off a lot of light pollution. All the beautiful bright lights from our buildings actually block out some of the light from the stars. So sometimes it's harder to see some constellations when you're within the city. But if we banded together, turned off all our lights, or if we went out somewhere like camping in the wilderness, we'd be able to see a lot more stars in our night sky. We'd even be able to see the band of our Milky Way galaxy reaching across the sky. So if you ever want to go stargazing and want to see lots of different constellations, I could recommend getting out of the city if you live in one and going out into the wild. Now, first up in our constellation hunting, we are going to find one of the easiest constellations, in my opinion, to find in the northern hemisphere in the night sky, the Big Dipper. Now, we can see here we have quite a bit of light pollution, perhaps from a city, so I'm going to turn off the lights a little bit so we can see a little bit clearer. Now, right here, we can see a collection of stars that looks kind of like a big soup spoon, a Big Dipper. We're going to take an even closer look. Here we are zoomed in on the Big Dipper. You can see the soup spoon here. Now, we can use the Big Dipper to find a very important star. If we go to the end of the Big Dipper, use these two pointer stars, and draw a straight line to the next brightest star we see in the sky, that is Polaris, or the North Star. It always points north. So if you're ever lost on a sea voyage or lost in the woods, need to find your way home, you can use the Big Dipper to find Polaris, which always will point you north. Now, Polaris is at the end of the handle of another constellation, the Little Dipper, or Ursa Minor. Now, the Big Dipper is actually not technically a constellation. I know, I sort of led you astray. It's actually something that we call an asterism. An asterism is a part of a larger constellation that is easily recognizable and is usually really easy to see when there's a lot of light pollution and related to popular culture. The Big Dipper, which we can see here, is actually part of a larger constellation, Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. So we had our Little Dipper, the Little Bear, Ursa Minor, and the Big Dipper is part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. There he is, walking across the sky. Pretty cool. Ursa Major, or the Great Bear, and Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, are examples of circumpolar constellations. That means that up here in the northern hemisphere, at the top half of the globe, where we are in North America, I'm personally in Canada right now, that means that these constellations are always visible throughout the year. So they're always spinning around us and are easy to spot in our night sky. We can use the position of the Big Dipper and Polaris, the North Star, to find another very cool circumpolar constellation, Cassiopeia. Now, this constellation is special to me because it's the first constellation that my dad taught me. Now, I often think that Cassiopeia kind of looks like a giant W in the sky. We can see it here. Now, the name Cassiopeia comes from, again, Greek and Roman mythology, and this constellation is supposed to be a queen sitting on her throne. Now, personally, I've never seen a queen sitting on her throne in this constellation, but I also learned another way to see this constellation. Modern-day astronomy uses these Greek and Roman constellations as ways of navigating the night sky, but the Greeks and the Romans are not the only people who looked up in the night sky and made pictures and stories out of what they saw up there. A story I learned about this constellation actually comes from Cree mythology, and it's the story of Grandmother Spider. So this is Grandmother Spider's head, these are her front legs, and then the rest of the constellation actually stretches out behind her, like this, across the Milky Way galaxy. Grandmother Spider actually sits on the band of the Milky Way galaxy, and she has a very special web that she shoots out throughout the universe, and it can actually connect people through space and time. It connects celestial beings through space and time. This is a very cool example of indigenous knowledge, or science that people have been talking about for thousands of years here in now what we call North America. The web of Grandmother Spider reminds me of a wormhole. The way that it's discussed in these legends is very akin to wormholes connecting to different parts of space and time. The Cree Nation have been talking about this concept of wormholes for thousands and thousands of years, but we often equate the concept of wormholes with Albert Einstein and newer Western ideas that are only about 100 years old in quantum physics. But actually, people have been talking about wormholes for thousands of years. I think that's amazing. So Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and Cassiopeia, or Grandmother Spider, are all examples of circumpolar constellations, or year-round constellations up here in the Northern Hemisphere. But what about seasonal constellations that only come out in parts of the year? One of the constellations that comes out in the winter time, we can see I am in the winter right now, hiding in the snow-covered trees, is the constellation of Orion, which we can see faintly here up in the night sky. Now, it's easy to spot Orion because of his belt of 3 stars, and it's a constellation that really dominates and covers the night sky in the wintertime. So his belt of 3 stars in a row makes it easy to identify Orion. Here we have a close-up zoomed-in view of Orion. We can see his belt of 3 stars here, and they connect together to make a warrior shape. So this is the skirt of the warrior, these are his shoulders, his head would be up here, and another part of the constellation makes a shield over here and a sword up over here. This is a simplified view of the constellation. Here we have another view of Orion in our night sky. We can see the belt of 3 stars here, and his shoulders here, and his skirt here. We can use the constellation of Orion to find a lot of really cool stars. If we draw a line from Orion's belt all the way down here, we will hit a very, very bright star in the night winter sky. And this is Sirius, or the dog star. It's very bright, and if you look at it long enough, you can actually see it twinkling different colors, which is pretty cool. In the constellation of Orion, we can see different stars that actually have things to do with the life cycles of stars. Over here, on his left shoulder, there is a star that appears a little bit brighter and a little bit pinker than the other stars around it, and that is the star of Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse. I like to pronounce it Betelgeuse. Don't say it 3 times, though. This star is a red supergiant star, which means it's a really big, really red, really old star that has started to expand. Now, the reason why some stars turn into red supergiants, we're actually going to answer in another episode about the life cycle of stars. But this star is particularly important because it is one of the next candidates in our night sky for the next supernova, or when stars explode. Now, when Betelgeuse explodes, don't worry, we're not going to feel any of the explosion because the star is way too far away. But we will get a really cool light show. It will look like a giant glowing orb in the sky, and it will probably be visible for several weeks to several months. Now, this could happen anytime. It could happen next week, or it could happen in 100 years. And a cool thing I like to think about is because this star is 600 light years away, it's going to take 600 years for that light to actually reach Earth. So right now, the star could have already exploded, and we just don't know it yet, because the light from the explosion is still traveling through space. Whoa. Another thing we can see in the constellation of Orion is on Orion's skirt, right here, the Orion Nebula. Now, it has to be a very clear night to see this, otherwise it looks kind of like a little smudge, but this is a stellar nebula, or a stellar nursery, a place where there's lots of gas and dust that eventually come together with enough gravity to create stars. So this is a little star factory, a place where stars are born. And as we zoom in, we can see some of the little tiny baby stars as they're born. Pretty cool. I'm diving into the nebula. So, Orion is a seasonal constellation for the Northern Hemisphere, and we can find it in the winter. But what about the constellations for the rest of the year? What are some different ones that we can find? Well, in the springtime, where we currently are, as I am recording this video, one that is really easy to see is the constellation of Virgo. And then in June, we'll be able to see Libra. And then throughout the summer, Scorpius, one of my favorite constellations, is visible. And then later on in the summer, we also get Sagittarius. Moving into the fall, September, we can start to see Capricornus, as well as Aquarius, another one of my favorite constellations. And towards the end of the fall, we also get Pisces in there as well. Now, towards the winter time, we get Orion again. We can also see Aries, as well as Taurus and Gemini. Some of the constellations I just mentioned might seem a little bit familiar to you if you've heard of something called the Zodiac or astrology. Now, my jam is more astronomy, not astrology. So I'm going to let Craft Commander Green actually talk to you about astrology, which is another very ancient, interesting knowledge that goes back from very, very long ago. Take it away, Craft Commander Green.
Greetings, spacecrafters. I am Virgo the Maiden. As goddess of the harvest, I am predictable, dependable, critical, modest, shy, and demure. Just because I was born under the astrological sign Virgo, according to Western astrology, doesn't mean I have to embody any specific traits. Although every Virgo I know is very good at giving advice. Cultures from around the world, some of them predating ancient Greece by a long shot, have come up with their own forms of astrology. According to the Chinese zodiac, I am a tiger. But if I followed the Celtic tradition, I'm associated with the hazel tree. And by the Mayan zodiac, I'm a jaguar. If I were to follow primal astrology, which combines the Western zodiac with the Eastern zodiac, then I'm a narwhal. Unicorn of the sea. But what is astrology? Well, the word astrology means to study the stars. Astrology is the belief that heavenly bodies like the stars, the sun, the moon, and planets influence people's lives and the natural world, whereas astronomy is a branch of science using empirical evidence to understand celestial bodies and the universe as a whole. Both involve observation. Over 3,000 years ago, early astronomers they observed the night sky, and they asked themselves the question, what would the daytime sky look like if they could see the stars? And they determined that of the constellations that rise and set with the seasons, some of them must pass through the same portion of the sky that the sun, the moon, and the planets move through. This narrow region is known as the ecliptic because that's where eclipses can occur. They called these constellations that run through the ecliptic the Zodiac, which actually means circle of animals. Many years later, the ancient Greeks adopted these constellations in the zodiac and they renamed them according to their mythology. And according to it, I am a Virgo. And that's because I was born on September 1st, when the constellation Virgo is up during the day, right where the sun is. So it appears that the sun moves through Virgo. So my astrological sun sign, according to Western astrology, is Virgo the Maiden. Okay, today we're making constellation banners and flags. So grab some paint. You can use any paint that you have. I'm using watercolor and then these cool photo inks that came from the late 1960s. My mom gave these to me, so we'll see what happens there. You also need some paper. I'm using watercolor paper and some brown paper bag paper. You need a ruler, a barbecue skewer, scissors, and a glue stick. So I'm going to start off by making the shape of the larger banner, and I'm just folding it in half without making a crease, just so that I can create this flourish on the bottom and have it be the same size or even sort of there. You know what I mean? Okay, and then we take our barbecue skewer and figure out how long we need it. So a little bit is sticking out each end, and that way you can use ribbon or string to hang the banner on the wall. All right, so I figured out how long I want it to be. I'm just breaking that off and then using my scissors to clean up the end here. And then you're going to grab your glue stick and glue this part on. So you can use, again, any kind of paper. It doesn't have to be brown paper bag paper. I just have a lot of this stuff lying around, and I really like the way it looks with watercolor paper. So just folding that over and sticking it down, and we have the background for our banner. Very cute. Okay, so I'm taking my watercolor paper, and this is just some scrap that I had, and I'm going to measure out how large I want it to be. And then using a ruler, you tear it. So that's how you want to cut watercolor paper. You usually like having that sort of rough edge. And I'm going to use some watercolor for this one. So just starting with this wet on wet technique and using some nice sky colors. So I'm using my cyan here. But of course you could use any colors. I was thinking it might be neat to have a red sky with, you know, white stars, or even pink sky with red stars. But I'm creating this sort of darker blue background. And it matches my nails. That was kind of unintentional. All right, some pink and purple in there too, and just making it really nice and dark so the stars show up. And for my stars, I've decided to make the constellation Taurus, because I have a friend who's a Taurus and their birthday's this week. So we're going to make stars, and I started off with a lighter, sort of more transparent constellation there of Taurus, and then I'm doing the brighter stars, and now I'm writing the word Taurus underneath. But here is the tip of the week. Don't use pen first, because look at that, I made a spelling mistake. Darn it, I forgot the U in Taurus. So this is why I usually use pencil first. I highly recommend that. And also, you know, if your spacing is off, you can always erase and fix it. So there we go. Now I can use my pen over top. Taurus. And I love the constellation Taurus because there's a lot of really cool things within that region of the sky. You know, the Pleiades are there, and they're so beautiful. And that beautiful red eye of the bull, which is Aldebaran, that star, is very cool. And see those two stars I just did there with my barbecue skewer? Such a great way to make stars. Those two stars that I did first, one of those is called the anti-center star. It's the furthest star from the center of our galaxy that we can see without a telescope. So it's the anti-center. Pretty cool. All right, so there we go. Now I'm ready to glue it onto my background. I should have waited till those stars dried, because you'll notice here when I'm gluing it down, I can't press it down all the way, but I faked it. There we go. Okay. Oh, did you hear my dog just came in the room? Could hear his little claws coming up the stairs. Okay, so I'm now going to tie my ribbon on, and I do have very small hands and kind of longer nails than usual right now, so this wasn't too difficult to do, but I did really do it the hardest way possible. My dog wants my attention, so I'm going to pet him while I'm doing this. All right, so we've got our ribbon on now, so we can hang this up on the wall, but you could also use any kind of rope or string or a dental floss if you have it. And now we're going to make a flag. So I'm just taking this darker part of the paper bag where the seam is, so it's a little bit more more stiff, easier to use. And I've also taken my barbecue skewers and painted one of them darker brown. All right, so tearing off a piece that's the right size to fit inside my flag. And now the real fun begins. So this is where I got very creative, and I have a few little containers of water, and I'm going to add some of this cool photo ink. So starting with violet, and I love the way this looks. Let's get closer. Ooh, spacey. Looks like a nebula. All right, so we're going to do some dip dyeing. So you could just put watercolor in with some water, but you need lots of watercolor and not a lot of water. And you want to let them dry in a cup there, and then you can come back and dip again when it's dry, and you'll start to get sort of darker lines. Almost looks like landscapes. It's pretty cool. So that color is great. That hot pink, that's a watercolor ink. And there we go. And we're now using bright orange. I love it. It looks like Orange Crush. Kind of want to drink it. It's like a spritz. Okay, and we're dipping again, and then beautiful vibrant orange. Now if I were to dip that orange into blue, you get a brown color. But if you dip it into red, it can look like a sunset. Oh, that's a beautiful color too. So yeah, it's hard to be patient and wait for them to dry, because really that's when you get the best effect. And this one's probably my favorite one out of all of them. I love the way it turned out. And here we have my cool dip dye strips of watercolor paper. I picked my favorite one, and now I'm making the flag the same way I did the banner, taking that barbecue skewer that I painted with some dark umber, just regular watercolor paint to make it darker. And now I have my flag, and I can I can attach my little strip of watercolor paper here. And so now I'm doing the constellation Cancer the Crab, because another one of my friends, their birthday is coming up in the summer, and this is the sign of the Zodiac that comes in June. And there it is. I stuck it in my plant, and I think E.T. approves. All right, so here is my banner and my flag, perfect for plants. And if you make one and you post it, you can hashtag spacecraft banner. Or if you want, you can always send your pictures to me, and I'll post them at the end of an episode, like these beautiful full moon dioramas made by Buddy and Arlo and Rosie, and one by Gillian as well. They're so nice. Thanks, guys. Okay, everyone, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and come back next week. Until then, stay curious and stay creative.